And we are back. We are headed into week 7. As always, I am your pilot of this show, the Die Hards Weekly DFS show. You can find me on Twitter at Kyle Tweets here, and joined by my co-pilot, Brady. You can find Brady at DFS_numbers on Twitter. Brady, how did last week treat you? Did you play the big dog Derrick Henry, or did you lose money? Because those were the two options. You played big dog and you won, or you didn't, and you lost. How'd you do?
Yeah, so I had a lot of Derrick Henry in tournaments, but decided to not play him in cash, so that did not work out. But it seemed like it was one of those weeks where, had all the right plays, just couldn't get him in the right lineup. But we made some really good calls last week. I think you called the Julio, and he went out there and scored a ton of points. So hopefully make some more good calls and bring it into this week and win some money here.
Yeah, I was big over the field in my MME on Julio, Matt Ryan. I was so big on Justin Jefferson. Played so much Justin Jefferson and played almost zero of the big dog and hardly made money at all. So that really hurt. If I had just said, you know what, I gotta eat this Derrick Henry chalk, I'd probably be in like Bermuda or something right now, not doing this show. But I am back, not $1 million richer, and we do the show again. We push onward.
Sounds good. Right. Yeah, I mean, I had a bunch of Derrick Henry, but I decided not to play him in cash, played Madison instead. He got like 4 points, so hopefully get it together this week.
All right, let's hop into the main slate. We have Houston versus Green Bay. Houston are 3.5-point underdogs. Oh my God, this total is rising. A 57.5-point total. Without scrolling through even, I can tell you that is the highest on the main slate as of Wednesday night. Man, what do you make of this absolute monstrous total? Green Bay just flopped last week. They were one of the two teams I was stacking. I was stacking Green Bay and I was stacking the Falcons. Luckily, the Falcons made me some money because I can tell you Green Bay did not make me any money. So what do you make of Green Bay coming off of a bad week? Vegas doesn't seem to care. They're saying a lot of points are going to be scored here.
Yeah, I noticed that. Like, Vegas does not care because, man, did Rodgers look like the worst he's probably ever looked in his career? You could argue, 2 interceptions. We do not see that from Rodgers ever. I remember like a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year, where he had like 3 interceptions on the whole year and just 2 in one game. It just did not look like he's himself. But, Vegas is expecting them to bounce back, as am I. And this is a game I'm really, really high on. I really like Deshaun Watson. He's been fantastic. We talked a little bit about it. He's someone that kind of struggled early in the year, but, ever since then, he's getting it together. 35 points last week, 29 the week before, 23. So he looks like he's getting kind of better as the year goes on, and a really good matchup here with the high point total. Somebody else I like from Houston, Will Fuller, who has been very good. So maybe be looking at that Watson-Fuller stack, and someone else that's coming on, and we kind of expected, or at least I did, early in the year for Brandon Cooks to have some type of role, and he didn't really do much. But ever since like the past 2 weeks, 21 points, 33 points the week before that, 21 targets in the past 2 weeks for Brandon Cooks. So maybe he's starting to finally come on, and he's only 5,200. So definitely looking to stack this game in many different ways. I think Aaron Jones on the Packers is probably one of my favorite running back plays due to Houston being really, really bad against the run. And I know Jamal Williams is going to get some run, but it being a close game here, probably are going to lead at some point. I don't think they're going to be trailing a bunch, and that's typically when they bring Williams in a lot. So I think Jones is a fantastic play. Other than that, Devontae Adams came back from the injury. Kind of expected more, only 12.1 points. But, last week was just crazy. They did not look like themselves. I do think they bounced back. Fantastic matchup here. 7,900 for Adams is somebody I'm looking at. But, lots of interest in this game as a whole. I'm going to have a lot of my ownership on this game in particular.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a game because of that massive total worth targeting. I will just add 2 players that I really want to hammer down on in this game that I like. Marquez Valdes-Scantling clearly operating as the number 2 receiver opposite Devontae Adams, sans Allen Lazard being out. So, when you get a guy who's going to be on the field for a majority of snaps, you're bound to see a lot of splash games. We haven't seen it yet, but the underpinnings of a splash game are there. Right now, 30 targets, number 41 in the league. Who cares? Air yards, baby. He is number 13 in air yards at 568, a top 10 air yard share. When Aaron Rodgers wants to go deep, man, he just goes to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and you can tell by that air yard share. If they are going to have a blow-up game, at this point it looks fairly obvious that Marquez Valdes-Scantling would be the second choice to play in this game. Those air yards, the deep targets, he's getting targeted a lot on play action too, and he hasn't quite connected on those, but that is an efficient throw to make. Play action, one of the most efficient plays in the game. And then on the other side of the ball, might be ugly, But I think David Johnson, you really have to consider him. I think he's 5.3 on DK, I believe. He's somewhere in that mid to low 5K range. And man, I mean, he's getting the work. He's number 6 in goal line carries in the NFL. He's like, as a receiver, he's played particularly well. He's been getting volume because right now his route participation, meaning the amount of routes potentially he could have run given all the dropbacks that Sean Watson has taken, 77.1%, number 1 among running backs, number 2 in overall routes. He's on the field for a ton of passing snaps despite the presence of Duke Johnson, and we know Duke Johnson doesn't really threaten him as a rusher. I think he's worth considering as a way to mix up potentially Aaron Rodgers stacks, or if you want to play this game as simply a one-offs game where you just play Davante Adams. I think on the other side, it's very interesting to have David Johnson there. I think we hit on all the bases, though. Definitely a game you have to be looking out for in tournaments. The next game we have has a falling total. It is Cincinnati versus the Cleveland Browns. Cincinnati are 3.5-point underdogs. The game has a 50.5-point total, come down half a point since opening. The way Cleveland wants to play football is just not incredibly conducive to much fantasy output outside of Kareem Hunt. I get that Odell Beckham is going to have a good target share and a good air yard share, but we essentially need them to be trailing by a lot before they ever choose to let Baker Mayfield throw. And I think the scenario in which they are trailing a lot is not that they get on the wrong side of a shootout. It's probably that Baker Mayfield plays like trash for the first half of the game, and then they have no other choice but to let him throw. I can't get myself to play much of these Browns outside of Kareem Hunt because of their offensive philosophy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not interested in the Browns passing game. Baker has not looked good whatsoever. Not interested in the receivers. Basically, for me, on the Browns side, it's Kareem Hunt, and that's about it. They want to run the ball. I know Hunt did not, he only had 16 total touches last week, and that was mostly because they were down by a lot, and I think he was playing kind of hurt, so I think they kind of try to rest him a little bit towards that second half. But yeah, Hunt's going to be a really good play here. 6,800. He's going to get 20-plus touches in what should be a close game. I'm not sure what the odds are for the game, but Hunt is probably where I'm going to on the Browns side. On the Bengals side, I think it's pretty interesting because this Browns passing defense has not been all that great this year. And Joe Burrow is 5,500. I know it's not the sexiest play in the world, but he's someone who throws the ball a ton. 39 attempts last week. When they played the Browns in week 2, he actually threw the ball 61 times. Now, I'm not expecting something like that, but if you're throwing the ball that much at 5,500 against a pretty good matchup here, I think that could be a nice cheap option for quarterback. Also, Joe Mixon, 6,300, someone who's been getting a ton of touches as well. Over 20 touches, I think, in every single game but one this year. And he's 6,300. That's very cheap. Should be a decently high-scoring game. I know the total's set at, I think, like 50.5, something like that. And Joe Mixon's going to get a lot of action here. So Mixon's somebody else I'm looking at. And another interesting option is A.J. Green at 4,300. I don't know what it is. I mean, all year, it looks like he's done pretty much nothing but maybe a breakout game last week against the Colts here. Very hard matchup there. He had 11 targets, 8 receptions, 96 yards, and he's 4,300. In a decent matchup against the Browns, it might be a shot to go after somebody like A.J. Green because we all know he's talented. It's just he hasn't been able to get it together this year. And with Joe Burrow throwing the ball so much, I think A.J. Green could be a very interesting option, probably low-owned as well.
Yeah, I definitely I struggle to get on board with A.J. Green. Just like up until last week, man, the dustiest of the dust. Him, Zach Ertz, T.Y. Hilton, we all need to just jam them into a retirement home. But you said it, last week finally actually showed some life from A.J. Green, who not only wasn't playing well, I don't know if he even wanted to play at all. We saw 2 weeks ago the interception that Joe Burrow threw that he just gave up on that play. Last week, definitely a turnaround from A.J. Green. I still think my preferred play, although his price is continually rising a bit, is T. Higgins. 5.3K on DraftKings, has seen at least 90 air yards and 7 targets in the past 4 games. I think as the season goes on, we're just going to continue to see him eating away at A.J. Green's role. But if that role is not dissipated yet, I still think A.J. Green is in play. And we saw last week, A.J. Green is not entirely phased out. Maybe week 16, 15, 14, we see him completely take a back seat. That hasn't happened yet, so he's still certainly in play. Yeah, and like you said, this game is more of Kareem Hunt on the Browns, and that's about it. I definitely think you can run it back. You could also play Browns defense. We don't talk much about defense because it's quite random, but you could play the Browns defense. They're fairly affordable. I think they're 2.8K if I remember that on DraftKings. But frankly, I'm not trying to chase too much defensive chalk. I'm trying to save money mostly. Defense is very random. That's probably why you don't hear us talk about them much. All right, let's hop in to it's just do whatever you want in defense. I don't care. Do whatever you want. It's you can look for good matchups. You can look for, spots where a bad quarterback is going to throw a lot. I don't know if Joe Burrow is bad, but he hasn't been awfully efficient. So I guess the Browns fit that mold. Really, I'm building the rest of my lineup and letting defense fall where it may, whether I'm hand building or doing it in an optimizer. So let's move on. Carolina versus New Orleans, a game that I have some sneaky interest in. We have New Orleans a 7.5-point favorites. The total is sitting even at 51. What do you make of this game? We've seen last week was a bit of a downturn for the Carolina Panthers, but they got a difficult matchup versus Chicago. Are you still comfortable going back to this Panthers team? And do we see the return of 2019 prime Michael Thomas? He is slated to make his return, not a guarantee yet, but it does appear that is on track. Do we see the return to form from Michael Thomas, and do you run him back with your Panthers?
Yeah, I'm really interested in this game, and like you said, you have some sneaky plays. I might bring up a couple here, and Michael Thomas is one of them. And it's crazy to call Michael Thomas a sneaky play, but we saw it last week. I mean, there's a lot of kind of concerns with Julio Jones and the injuries, and Michael Thomas is someone who's been injured as well. I think he's currently dealing with some injuries. I don't think he even practiced today, but Michael Thomas at 7,600, it's very interesting because of how cheap he is. And I know 7,600, it seems like a lot, but he's someone who opened up the year starting at 9,000 salary. So just thinking getting Michael Thomas here at 7,600, it could be a very good thing. And I do think, and if he comes in here, somewhat healthy, and I do think he does, I think he can definitely break out. And like you mentioned, the Carolina Panthers looked pretty bad last week, but I'm not looking at that too much. I hope other people do, because I do like Mike Davis at 6,600. And he did pretty bad last week. I mean, he only had 12.5 points, only 3 targets, 2 receptions. Chicago did very good at kind of getting him out of what he does. They did not let him get the ball much at all, and good job by Chicago there. But New Orleans is not the same defense as Chicago here. So Mike Davis is someone who, before that Chicago game, was doing very, very well. I mean, getting 9 receptions, 5 receptions, 8 receptions, just catching the ball. And 6,600 I still think is pretty cheap for Mike Davis. McCaffrey's going to be returning in the next couple weeks, so I'm still going to go back to the Mike Davis train. I like the matchup a lot better than I did last week. Other than that, I think Alvin Kamara is going to be one of the more popular plays on the slate, and I definitely like him a lot. Carolina is a defense I like to target quite a bit from running backs because they do have the worst run defense in the league. I think they're 32nd against running backs, giving up the most DraftKings points this year. And Kamara is someone who is going to get a lot of receptions, and I know Murray, it's very frustrating seeing Murray in there, especially when you have Kamara in season long like me. But, when Kamara's in the game, he's still doing very, very well. I remember he had that 50-point game a couple weeks ago, so he has that high ceiling. And Michael Thomas coming back, I think it will scare just a little bit of ownership off of Kamara, and I think it will hurt him in a little bit, but I still think that this is a fantastic matchup. He's still going to get a bunch of opportunities. I do think he has 10 target upside still, so Kamara is somebody I'm going to, I think is a really good cash play, really good tournament play. But yeah, the Carolina receivers are really interesting. Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, I think they're both in play. I think DJ Moore's 5,600. That's really intriguing. But yeah, this is a very sneaky game. I don't really see many people talking about this game, and I do think it can have some upside.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have a Carolina defense that their corners have played above expectation, but their run stopping has been there's been no stopping in their run stopping. So their defense is definitely beatable, and even the Saints have kind of gotten significantly worse since last year and even the year before that. Right now, Pro Football Focus, I believe, has them graded as a bottom 5 coverage unit. That gives me a lot of optimism for guys like DJ Moore and guys like Robbie Anderson, who Teddy Bridgewater, their quarterback, has played fairly well. He hasn't been, incredibly aggressive by any means. That's just simply not his calling. But man, he has been efficient in throwing. I mean, from a clean pocket, which is the most stable way we have to judge a quarterback, a top 5 completion percentage. He is top 15 in expected points added, maybe just on a single play in terms of football points, actual points. He's adding a lot to the actual NFL team that is the Carolina Panthers, and that's good for points as well. And then his 8.1 yards per attempt, top 10. He's been very good in this offense. I think that bodes well for a potential sneaky shootout here. And maybe you would say a 51-point total shouldn't be sneaky, but given how many totals over 50 we have on this slate, I do agree. I think this game is going to go well under owned. And Michael Thomas, he was a guy we were talking about paying $9K for last year. I know we haven't seen him, and he still might end up not being 100% healthy. I just don't care. If I think I can even get modest ownership on a fairly cheap Michael Thomas, fairly cheap in terms of I believe he's 7.6K. That's cheap for Michael Thomas standards. I'm going to do that every time. It's the same argument I had for Julio Jones last week. When you get a stud player like that at modest ownership and a lower than average price, I think you just got to keep playing him. Health aside, it is just it is worth the risk you take on. Let's move on to another game with another high total. Tennessee versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh are now 1-point underdogs. This line has actually shifted from where it opened based on the book I'm looking at. A 50.5-point total also coming down. What do you make of this game? Pittsburgh's offense, I think a lot of the guys are underpriced. When you look at Deante as 4.2K, I think he is viable in cash. And I guess other cash plays I have, Alvin Kamara and Mike Davis, I think both based on the receiving game, definitely worth considering in cash. Deante, we saw through 2 weeks, 10 and 13 targets. He was a dominant target leader on this team, a 34% target share and I believe a 37% air yard share. He was clearly number one. And the emergence of Claypool, while it potentially hurts him, I think if anything, it just puts James Washington on the bench, and it probably means Juju is out there playing a ton of snaps and not getting a lot of targets. And this offense, in terms of their passing game, runs through Deante Johnson, runs through Chase Claypool. Are you playing the Pittsburgh receivers?
Yeah, I definitely will, and I'm really interested in Deante Johnson. I mean, 4,200, and that just does not make sense. And it's actually interesting because they did price up Claypool more than Juju Smith-Schuster. If you told me that at the beginning of the year, I would have called you crazy, but it happened. So I don't know what's going on with Juju. Is he hurt? I don't know, but man, Juju has not been looking that great. Claypool's been outscoring him. Deante Johnson outscored him, I think, week 1 or 2. And yeah, Deante Johnson, somebody I'm definitely going to go to this week. Looks like he's going to play. I don't know about the ownership. I feel like people are going to be on it because that price is way too cheap there. But we saw it in week 1 when he played. He had 10 points, had 10 targets. Week 2, 23 points, 13 targets. So Ben Roethlisberger, he really likes this guy. And I don't know. It's really hard to tell like which receivers are going to do good because Claypool has looked like amazing. Juju has not looked amazing, so I do think Johnson's still going to get some decent work here. And honestly, on the Tennessee side, I don't know if I want to play much here because the Pittsburgh defense has been very, very good. So probably a pass on the Tennessee side, but on the Steelers side, I think Connor's in play. I think he's always in play on a decently high scoring game. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised with that total, with how good the Steelers defense has been. A.J. Brown is somebody I do like, but again, the Steelers matchup kind of does scare me away a little bit. But when he's played, 22 points, 21 points, 9 points, he's been looking very good ever since returning from injury. And, Anthony Firsker, if that's how you pronounce it, if Smith does not play, Firsker at 3,000 could be a very good tight end play. I mean, he went off. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 28.3 points. So that's definitely somebody I'm going to be looking at for a cheap punt tight end. But if Smith does play, obviously Firsker is not going to be in play for me. But yeah, kind of a tough game because of how good the Steelers defense is. But Deante Johnson is probably my favorite play in that game.
Yeah, so we talk about ownership a lot on this show. Where can you get your ownership, you might ask? Well, boy, do I have the deal for you. For just $12, you can get your Football Diehard subscription for the rest of the season. And if you use the promo code DIEHARDS, you get a 15% discount. So you get a ton of awesome content from myself, from Brady, and you get those ownership projections. And that is kind of the crux of how we are going to continue to talk about approaching tournaments. Do I think Derrick Henry is awesome, an incredible athlete? He steps onto the field and makes these other players look like small children. Yes, but do I think a guy who doesn't catch passes and is basically subject to game script and needing long runs to score touchdowns, or at least needing long runs to absolutely blow up, do I think that guy at 25, 30% ownership like he was last week is a good play? I don't think so. I think I'd rather play Derrick Henry in a spot where I don't think people are going to be on him. And do we see that for the next few weeks? I doubt it. I think Derrick Henry is just going to continually be popular. And for that reason, I'm fine with, last week, he didn't really have a great first half. He was having this 2020 Derrick Henry half where he gets some touches, but he simply just doesn't break a long run. And when he doesn't, he's not a pass catcher, so he doesn't pop off. I'm fine betting on him not popping off at high ownership every time that happens. And like I said, you can get that ownership by using promo code DIEHARDS at footballdiehards.com to get your subscription. Just $12 before you even take off the 15% discount. Ownership, content, it's all popping there. So please go ahead and check that out. Helps us. We really appreciate it. So check that out. Let's move on to, we can almost not even talk about this game. We have the New York Jets facing the Buffalo Bills. It is a 13.5-point favorite Buffalo Bills team, a 45-point total that is on the downswing. I mean, Josh Allen has struggled in his past 2 weeks. I don't project that to happen against the lowly Jets. I simply don't want to play players in DFS where I don't think there are good run back options necessarily, and I don't think the opponent can score points. Whether it's Sam Darnold, Joe Flacco, I don't see the Jets putting up many points, and I need someone to keep Josh Allen throwing the football. If he is going to be able to rest on his laurels and they're going to grind a mix of Devin Singletary and Zach Moss into the ground for the third and fourth quarters, it's difficult for me to get excited. I think the only way I would really approach this game is potentially Rashad Perriman fairly cheap and just step back into his previous role. The efficiency isn't going to be pretty, but all it takes is one or two fluky plays. He's quite cheap. And if John Brown doesn't play, Gabriel Davis steps in as the number 3 receiver. There's a pretty impressive prospect coming out of UCF, all things considered. I don't hate when there is so much value. If you want to play Rashad Perriman, I don't think it's a bad play. If Gabriel Davis ends up stepping up as the number 3 receiver because John Brown hasn't been practicing with, I believe, a knee injury, a lot of value can help compensate for not a ton of points. Josh Allen is still expensive, but if you are banking a good play in Stephon Diggs and a good cost-adjusted play in Gabriel Davis, and then you can run it back with a super cheap Rashad Perriman, I think when you adjust the amount of points, the lack of points that could be scored for how cheap these guys are, that's the only argument I can make to try and sell myself on why it's even worth talking about this game.
Yeah, I'm not interested in this game as well. You mentioned some really good value plays. Perryman should be fine at 3,700. Gabriel Davis, if John Brown does not play, 3,600. And, other than that, there's not much. Crowder has been fantastic. He is very cheap as well, 5,900. He's getting a ton of targets, 13 last week, 10 the week before, 10 the week before that, and 13 in week 1. So he's scoring about 22 DraftKings points per week. I think he's probably going to be low owned as always. I had him a little bit last week. The week before, he's been doing fine. Other than that, on the Bills side, Stephon Diggs is someone who's going to be in play each and every single week. I think he's okay. Cole Beasley, especially if Brown is out, Beasley could do fine. Even when Brown's playing, 14.5 points last week, 11 the week before that, 12 the week before that, and 19 the week before that. So I think Beasley's fine, but honestly, probably going to stay away from this game. Like you mentioned, some of those value plays, something you can look at, but as a game as a whole, this is not going to be something you really want to target. A low-scoring game. Probably just going to cross it off my list, maybe find a play or two out of the game. But other than that, not too interested in it.
Yeah, I agree. It's just so difficult to find myself playing a lot of players involved in a game that features the Jets, either side of the ball, whether it be Jets players or their opponents, just eh. Next game we have is Atlanta versus the Detroit Lions. The Lions are 2-point underdogs. The total is another crazy total at 55.5. Both defenses quite poor. Both offenses have weapons worth targeting, specifically the Atlanta passing game. I will throw this to you before we talk about Atlanta's passing game. What do you make of the DeAndre Swift, Adrian Peterson split? Because we finally saw the explosion game from DeAndre Swift last week. It was on 14 carries. Adrian Peterson still saw 15 carries. What do you make of this split? Can DeAndre Swift push him to the fringes and become a weekly RB2/1?
Yeah, I think he could, and we did see how great he looked last week, and only 14 attempts. He had 30 DraftKings points. Very, very impressive there. So I think Swift at 5,400, it could be a decent play. I think it's going to be kind of popular because, everybody saw how great he did. Very cheap play. I think he's in play, and other than that, on the Detroit side, I think going against Atlanta, Kenny Golladay is a really good option at 6,700. Even if you want to stack Stafford and Golladay together, I know Stafford did not have the best game last week, but I know he has another great matchup here against Atlanta, one of the worst passing defenses in the league. And Golladay, 6 targets last week, 17.5 points. He's getting a decent amount of targets. He should be good for a 7 to 10 target game on any given week. And going against a really bad defense in Atlanta, I think Golladay could be good. And Matt Ryan is somebody who really impressed me last week, and I was all over this. And he had 3 really bad games in a row. It did lower his ownership a decent amount. And Matt Ryan, 34 points against Minnesota. He finally got it together. And another decent matchup here against Detroit, 6,700. And this was your call last week. Julio Jones, you were all over it. 36.7 points. He had 10 targets, 2 touchdowns. And, typically Julio Jones isn't going out there getting, multiple touchdown games, but had a nice 2-touchdown game there at fairly low ownership. I think you could go back to Julio Jones this week at 7,100, I believe. I think Calvin Ridley's in play any given week at 7,300. And this is kind of a good game to kind of have some ownership on. A 55.5 point game total on both sides. So Atlanta, I'm probably going to have a decent amount of maybe some Matt Ryan and Ridley stacks, Matt Ryan, Julio, and I think Todd Gurley at 6,000 could be interesting because it's going to be a high-scoring game. I would not be surprised if he did find the end zone. He has like 4 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. I think Gurley could be fine, but it seems like he's a little bit touchdown dependent. But yeah, this is a good game to target.
Yeah, so how do you approach, I guess the last thought is that these Falcons, especially the top 2 receivers, they are expensive. And we even saw last week where Julio Jones was much more affordable at 6,700. It was still difficult and didn't end up being wildly profitable to play Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones because they are so expensive that Calvin Ridley's, 19 points? It just wasn't enough at his price tag. He was 7,800. For these guys to both go off, it takes so many points because going off for them doesn't just mean 15, 20. It means 25 to 30. So to have 2 receivers go for 25 plus, which is kind of what they need at their respective prices. I mean, Matt Ryan just has to go nuclear, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Is that even enough? It would need to still be somewhat concentrated. How do you approach if you're looking to, or are you looking to double stack the Falcons, and how would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not. I can kind of make an argument for it, but everything would have to go perfect for you. Like you said, they're going to have to score a ton. And those prices, it's just going to be hard, especially with some really good running back plays on the slate this week. I don't really think you need to go up and pay for wide receivers. Like Julio Jones, 7,100, Ridley, 7,300. If you put both those in your lineup, you're going to kind of be hurting at running back there. So personally, I'm just going to go with one or the other. I'm not going to have them in the same lineup, but I do think both have a great opportunity to do good in this game.
All right, let's hop into a game that I won't belabor too much. Washington versus Dallas. Washington are 1-point favorites, I guess, and 46-point total. Yeah, I mean, Dallas sans Dak is bad. Washington with any of their quarterbacks is bad. Well, what do we do with this game? There are some good players in this game. I mean, all of the Dallas receivers are quite talented. Terry McLaurin is very good. Antonio Gibson, I'd love to see him get the ball more, but frankly, the total, which has dropped 1.5 since opening, the quarterback play on both sides, I don't know how much interest I have in this game, which is a shame because there are a lot of good players, but I just can't find myself playing the receivers of either of Andy Dalton or Alex Smith or Kyle Allen. I think it'll be Kyle Allen, but does he even play the full game? What do you make of a game that has so many good players and 2 terrible quarterbacks?
Yeah, first off, it's really interesting and kind of funny to see that Washington is actually the favorites in a football game. I mean, I never thought I'd see that, but that's pretty hilarious there. But yeah, for this game, it's tough. Dallas looked really bad offensively on Monday. Andy Dalton looked really bad. I don't think they're going to be the same Dallas team they were with Dak. I don't think it's even going to be close. I think Andy Dalton's not, the best quarterback in the world, and he definitely showed it on Monday. Did not look good, and I'm not expecting him to look good. I guess there's a couple things I want to point out, and it's more from the Washington side. I know it's Elliott's there, Cooper's there, Lamb's there, so many good plays, but with Andy Dalton, I don't know how good they're going to do. Washington football team defense at 2,500. I actually like that quite a bit. They are at home. A very low-scoring game, and Dalton looked really bad. So I think that's going to be my go-to punt defense this week at 2,500. And other than that, you touched on him a little bit, McLaurin. It's just who's throwing to him is very concerning. But, last week, 12 targets. The week before that, 7, 14, 8. The targets are all there. Very cheap price. And typically I like targeting this Dallas defense. So I'm going to do that a little bit here. I'm going to have some McLaurin because Dallas's defense is very, very bad. I do think McLaurin can have some success here. And I guess for a punt tight end option, kind of bring him up every single week, it seems like. Logan Thomas, he did have a good game last week, finally found the end zone for the second time this year. He had 13.2 points. He's someone who has a decent amount of targets, very low salary option. So I guess he's a fine punt tight end option against this Dallas defense I like targeting. But other than those 3, not really interested. But I do like that Washington football team defense call.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Terry McLaurin is a fine play. This Dallas defense is so bad that I think even Kyle Allen can be competent against them. I'm not going to say he's going to be good. Not going to say he's a guy you should play, but I think he can be good enough to get Terry McLaurin the football. And that's all you need. You get Terry McLaurin the football, and magic will happen. And I think versus the Dallas defense, it's a decent likelihood that happens. Not guaranteed because Kyle Allen's terrible, but good enough chance that it's worth playing him. Our next game, Arizona versus Seattle. 56-point total is one of the highest, although not the highest on the slate. Arizona are 3.5-point dogs. Kyler Murray did not look good simply against a Dallas defense that makes most quarterbacks look good, but he got it done with his legs again. He's pacing for, I believe, 987 yards, over 130 carries, and 16 touchdowns. 16 touchdowns would be the most ever for a quarterback on the ground, and his rushing yards would be top 5 all time, I believe, in a single season. His passing hasn't been great. When it happens, it all goes to DeAndre Hopkins. Is there any way you double stack him in a game environment that should be absolutely nuts? Should be scoring back and forth all night long. But, I don't love Christian Kirk. Andy Isabella got 2 targets, couldn't connect on any of them. Larry Fitzgerald is dust. They don't use tight ends. Are you single stacking this game? Can you find yourself double stacking this game? And who do you run it back with? Or obviously, you could just tell me that why would you not play Russell Wilson?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You kind of touched on it. Kirk, I'm not interested at all. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards him because he had a long touchdown. But other than that, he only had 2 receptions. Really, I think DeAndre Hopkins is a very, very good play. I think at 8,200, if you can afford him, I think he's a fantastic play against the Seattle defense. One of the worst defenses in the league. I think they're ranked 32nd against the wide receiver in DraftKings points given up, something like that. But Hopkins didn't have a great game against Dallas, which kind of surprised me. I mean, the Dallas defense was not all that great, but Murray was just not getting him the ball. He was open a bunch of times, and Hopkins was not able to find him, and they weren't able to connect. I mean, 8 targets, only 2 receptions. I'm going right back to Hopkins this week. He's someone who has that elite ceiling in a game that's supposed to score very, very high. Hopefully it lowers his ownership. Hopefully people look at the last game and say, oh, he's not doing great, and then I think he's going to bounce back big time. Kyler Murray, touched on it a little bit. I mean, he's not looking overly impressive, but he's getting it done. 29 DraftKings points last week, 30 the week before. He's averaging 28.1 points. And what I like about Murray, especially for cash, is that rushing upside. He's running the ball a lot, 10 attempts in week 6, 9 in week 5. Just has that rushing upside that you want in your cash games for a nice floor. So I think Murray's fine. Russell Wilson at 8,000, if you can afford him, I think he's one of the best quarterback plays on the slate. And obviously you have elite stacking options with DK Metcalf, someone who I'm very high on and someone who's been amazing this year. Metcalf does have 5 touchdowns on the year. I do think he has high touchdown upside in a game that's supposed to score high as well. Good matchup. And Lockett is actually pretty cheap at 6,600. So they dropped his price down a little bit. He has not been having the best games. Last week he had 8.4 points. The week before that, only 6. So they kind of, dropped his price down a little bit, but he's still getting a decent amount of targets, 9 in the last 2 weeks. Before that, he was getting 13, 8, 8. So I do think the targets will come back. I can see him bouncing back, and Lockett at that price is very interesting. But lastly, I'm going to touch on Chris Carson at 6,400. In what should be a very high-scoring game, I do think there's touchdown upside for him. And he's someone who just gets it done as well, averaging 20 DraftKings points on the year. I think he'll be lower owned. I think a lot of people are going to go towards the Russell Wilsons, the Locketts, the Metcalfs, and the passing game of both games. And I think kind of the run game on both sides will kind of get a little bit lower owned. I think Kenyon Drake is in play. He's someone who's looked awful all year until Monday night where he scored 31.4 points. I don't know if I really believe that, but hopefully he keeps getting it together because that's kind of what we expected Kenyon Drake to look like when we started the year. But Drake should be fine at 4,800. It is pretty cheap there.
Yeah, that's the draw with me for Drake. It's 4,800 for a guy who's going to see 2/3 of the carries on a running attack that you can fairly project to be efficient because of just how much Kyler Murray makes defenses struggle to defend the run with his legs. That opens up lanes for running back like Kenyon Drake, who does have some explosive playability. He doesn't have really any role as a receiver. So I think he is an interesting choice because he's so cheap, he gets a lot of carries, and he could potentially work in a scenario where if he breaks off a long one, there's a turnover by Seattle, and he scores again. That is an early lead for Arizona, and that forces Russ to cook all freaking game. That's what you want from your Russell Wilson stacks, is a game where they cannot afford to run the football because he's only number 22 in pass attempts. We talk about them cooking, but they're not passing at a crazy high percentage, and they're still running fairly slow. So they're letting him cook more than they have. But most of what we're seeing is just Russell Wilson being incredible on still fairly modest volume. In a game where I know it's not incredibly likely, but in a game where somehow Arizona gets up early, that is an incredible spot for Russell Wilson to be in. And you profit more in that spot than the odds of it hitting would tell you. I think the ownership is going to tell you something along the lines of it's not very likely. anything can happen. Football is a very random sport, and if that is the case, your Russell Wilson stacks are going to go nuclear. So I like that option. I think Greg Olsen makes a sneaky piece of the stack because it does cost you a lot to play both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. I think it's a sneaky option just because he does get looks in the red zone. He's on the field for a large portion of the snaps, and those snaps come with Russell Wilson targets. So one of the most efficient quarterbacks, even if he only gets a handful of looks, he's cheap enough that I think he makes a solid punt play. This is weird. Our next game, Kansas City versus Denver. Kansas City, 10-point favorites. Only a 46 total. It's come down 2.5 points since opening. It's weird because I love Kansas City, but in the same scenario that we talked about with Josh Allen, when I really have no faith that Denver has any chance of putting up a fight against a Kansas City defense that has been very good to start the year, I find it difficult to see, Travis Kelce having a blow-up game because he is priced fairly high and there aren't a ton of high-priced guys. He's going to be owned. So if he's going to be high-owned, he costs you a lot, and his team is not necessarily going to be forced into throwing the football. I'm not huge on him, and the same argument applies to Tyreek Hill. Maybe the only guy you could say you should be excited about, given the context of this game, is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But then you run into the Le'Veon Bell dilemma. Does the presence of Denver versus Kansas City specifically, does that tamper your expectations for Kansas City?
Yeah, you broke it down perfectly. Like 10-point favorites, I don't really expect this game to be competitive for a bunch of reasons. The Kansas City Chiefs defense has been very, very good. They are priced at $4,300. I mean, I think there's cheaper options that you can go to, but they should be fine there. And yeah, I don't think this game is going to be all that competitive, all that close. I can see Kansas City going out to a big lead and kind of slowing the pace down a little bit, running the ball more, kind of like we see Baltimore do in a lot of their games. So really for the Kansas City side, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is somebody I'm looking at because if they do get that big lead, I mean, they're just probably going to run the ball. And Edwards-Helaire is someone who got 26 rushing attempts last week, 4 receptions. That's 30 touches there. And he actually looked really good. He was not able to find the end zone, still scored about 24 points. And it's weird. I mean, he's only got in the end zone one time in 6 games. You'd think on a Chiefs offense that scores a lot, you'd think their number one running back would get in the end zone, but not Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So maybe this is the week. I do think he's going to get a bunch of opportunities. I know Bell is kind of getting in the mix here. I don't know. I still want to see Bell in this offense. I want to see what he looks like. But Helaire should be fine. Other than that, it's really hard to play anybody on the Denver side. Tim Patrick, someone who's been really good. 4,600 is very cheap. Getting a decent amount of targets, 8, 7, 4, 5 in the last 4 weeks. Got 17 points last week. He had a big, like a 60-yard catch early in the game. But Patrick's somebody you can go to. But yeah, I'm probably going to stay away from this game for the most part. There are some other running backs I like better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he's fine at 6,100, cheap, but not a game I'm overly interested in here.
Yeah, one more game to get through that I don't think I'm not interested in. Maybe you will be. And then we do end with a bit of a banger, but we'll start with the Patriots versus San Francisco. The Patriots, the spread has come down. Only 1.5-point favorites now, as has the total come down to 44. Cam didn't look good. San Francisco played better, but we know that they just want to run the football. Where do you find interest in this game? Because we've seen now the Patriots kind of look a bit, they just didn't look like they were playing Seattle, essentially. They got a lot of their season-long numbers early in the season looked so good because of an awesome game specifically against Seattle, but outside of that game, they haven't been quite as exciting as we might have hoped. And on the other side, George Kittle always in play, but as underdogs to a great defense, I don't know. Another game where, simply put, if we're going to see totals under 45 on a slate where there are like 5 over 50, I'm just not sure why I need to go to San Francisco, New England. If this was a slate where there was one game over 50, say it was a 52-point total, was the highest one of the slate, and it was garnering all the ownership, I could potentially get into some pivots where I even go to kind of a grimy game like this one because I know I'm going to garner so low ownership. But there are so many games with high totals that some of them will actually have low ownership. So I don't need to go this deep. How do you feel about this game? Is there anyone you're looking to play? Because this is a game I'm comfortable with essentially skipping.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, with so many high totals, and it's like 55, 55, 56, like bunch of high totals. I don't really think you need to go into a game total with like a 44 like this one. The only guy I kind of want to touch on is McKinnon at 5,800. There's going to be no Mostert. And there's going to be a lot of running. Most likely he's going to get a lot of action here, so I guess McKinnon. But other than that, I'm not interested in anybody. I'm going to stay away from this game. A 44-point total. I think there's many, many other options to choose from, many other games, but McKinnon would be that guy if I was to play somebody in it.
All right, we will move on then to the final game of the main slate, and this is one that I think we should be targeting. We've gone through a stretch of 2 games that we are not incredibly excited about. I would imagine, I don't know about you, but for myself personally and for my bankroll, this is a game that I will be heavily invested in. It is the Los Angeles Chargers as 7.5-point favorites over the Jacksonville Jaguars, a 49-point total. Not quite the heights of 56, 54, 55, but I do think because of the Jacksonville defense and the incredible production of Justin Herbert, this is a game we can comfortably target even with heavy game stacks. How do you feel about this game?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this game, and I really do like the Chargers side of the game here. And Justin Herbert at 6,400, he's someone who's really, really impressed me. 27 DraftKings points in Week 5, 24 the week before that, 19, 26. He's very consistent, and he's looking very good, and he has some really good weapons. I know we're missing Eckler, but we still have Kelly there. Justin Jackson is someone I do want to talk about, and he did come up on I think he's questionable now. Something's going on with him, but I think he does play. If he does not play, Kelly's obviously a fantastic play. But if he does, he was actually getting a decent amount of carries, 15 rushing attempts, 5 receptions, 20 total touches. And he's actually cheaper than Kelly, which is really interesting to me because it looked like Justin Jackson was that guy last week. And going against a Jacksonville defense, I think you can really attack this defense. I think they're one of the worst defenses in the league. Keenan Allen, something's going on with his back. It's looking like he's trending towards playing. If he does play, I think Keenan Allen at 6,200 is an absolute steal. I think you could definitely pair him with Herbert. If Allen does not play, that opens up a big opportunity for Mike Williams. We saw Allen leave the game last week with that back injury, and he scored 30.9 points. He had 8 targets, 5 receptions, definitely has the big playability. He scored twice. So if Allen does not play, I think Mike Williams is good, but it looks like Allen plays, and hopefully he does because I do have him in my season long, and I do like that Herbert-Allen stack. On the Jacksonville side, it's kind of tough. I think James Robinson is in play for sure. I just don't know what to do with these wide receivers. I mean, Chark, Cole, I don't know what to do with these wide receivers yet. There's so many options and so many guys that can get it done. Even Conley's getting some action at 3,000. But I do like that Chargers side. You can probably run it back with, pick one of these guys and run it back with.
Yeah, I think from the Chargers side, it is quite clear that if you're playing Justin Herbert, there are 3 options, and I'm typically limiting myself to double stacks because I do think you start dipping into, you eat away at your own potential upside by playing a triple stack, although it's not impossible, I think, in the right scenario. But I think there are 3 clear options. Mike Williams, who I think makes a great leverage play. I think you can also just use him to make your Justin Herbert lineups different because Keenan Allen at 6,200 is just too cheap. I'm assuming he plays because he only was dealing with back spasms they were on bye last week, I believe. It was 2 weeks ago on Monday night where they played New Orleans, and he left the game on the second or first drive with back spasms. Doesn't sound like any sort of long-term concern. I think we are likely, not guaranteed, but we are likely to see him. He saw 40 targets in his 3 games, 3 full games at least, with Justin Herbert. He still has a top 5 target share despite missing almost the entirety of the last game we saw him play. His 6.2K price should be 7.2K in an awesome spot versus Jacksonville. My only lean on the other side specifically, Hunter Henry's the last guy. I don't know if I mentioned it, but Hunter Henry, the last guy. Interesting pivot, still going to be fairly high owned, but after Travis Kelce, ownership looks pretty flat this week at tight end is my belief. We're going to see a lot of ownership on Kelce, some on Kittle, some on Henry. I do think he makes an interesting pivot because he's only 4.5K. Saves you some money, saves you some ownership. Just simply a good stacking option, nothing more outside of that. On the other side, my biggest lean would be that in the past 3 weeks, DJ Chark has 8, 3, and 7 targets. He has over 100 air yards in two of those 3 games, running over 30 routes in every single game. And they have used him more so than not only any of their other receivers, but more so than almost any other receiver in the league in the red zone, specifically 8 red zone targets as number 2 in the NFL. So he would be my preferred run back option, but I don't think it is the most ideal scenario when Keelan Cole and LaVisca and Chris Conley can all play a role. So Chark is my lean, but it's only a soft lean. I prefer, if I'm playing Justin Herbert, to have a lot of Justin Herbert lineups, and I'll probably be mixing in different guys from the Jacksonville side. Man, that's it. That is the entirety of the main slate. So before we get out of here, one more time, I want to remind you to go to footballdiehards.com, For just $12, you can get all of our awesome stuff with your $12 subscription. That doesn't even include using the promo code DIEHARDS for an extra 15% off. You get our ownership projections, which is kind of the crux of building tournament lineups. You get all of our awesome content as well. So go ahead and check that out. For myself, at Kyle Tweets here. For Brady, at DFS_numbers. We'll catch you